Well, our talk title this morning is Teaching or Preaching. And it's rather a broad topic and could possibly be a sensitive topic. It is applicable to each and every one of us. It is applicable to us as a group. And it is applicable for each and every person on planet Earth. So let's look at how we are talking about the ideas of teaching and preaching first. Teaching is an idea or principle that is shared. It engages learners to enable their understanding and application of knowledge, concepts, and processes. So when we're looking at the idea of teaching, we're looking at the sharing of ideas, whether that is a sharing within ourselves for ourselves, or whether it is within the idea of sharing with one another. The idea of preaching, as defined, is the giving of moral advice, and sometimes in a pompous, self-righteous way. Preaching is the idea of persuading other people to believe the way you believe, to believe a particular belief rather than to believe in themselves.
I think we can change those words a little bit, and I think that teaching is training. Teaching is training ourselves to think a right way, to think correctly, positively, and affirmatively. And preaching is indoctrination. Following the line or taking or following somebody else's opinion. We have no authority over others. We have no expectations for them to believe what we say or to follow our example or anything. Each of us is a divine, individualized expression. We are the life of God in this world. We are the face of God, the hands of God, the voice of God into the world, individually expressing God in unique and beautiful ways. Learning from others' actions or example of others is living in effect. And we choose to be causation. Applying intuitive input is living causally and creatively. And we believe that's what our mission is as religious scientists, to express God individually. Albert Einstein says, education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. We don't tell people what to think, we tell them how to think, and use those thoughts productively. And quite often there's a step difference between what is factual and what is truth. And we worry more about divine truths than mere facts. Teaching is training the brain. That's also what science of mind treatment is all about, is conditioning our brain or our mind to accept only that which we wish to experience in the world and then bringing that about as a result. Preaching is the spouting of opinions, as Deborah said. I remember a time when I went to a fundamentalist church because they were having a music program, and I knew several people that were in the program, and I wanted to support them. And after they did some of their music, the minister got up, well, I'm saying the preacher, got up, and he was talking about music. And he said his whole topic is based on the fact that all the music of Jesus is good music, and anything that is not of Jesus is of the devil. And so therefore we should shun any music that does not have anything to do with Jesus. Well, I must admit I did learn something that night. I learned never to go back there. Did not agree with what I felt was my life's purpose. And teaching is fostering thought. Teaching is fostering creative energies within individuals to think for themselves, to create for themselves, to better themselves. Khalil Gibran says, the teacher who is indeed wise does not bid you to enter the house of wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. We believe that is our purpose here as teachers, and in Science of Mind, that's what we try to do.
Yes. And it's also what Ernest Holmes says. He says, teach and practice, practice and teach. That is all we have, that is all we are good for, that is all we ever ought to do. Now, when he said those words, he was talking about the centers, religious science churches at the time. But his words are still powerful messages for us today, and not just for us as ministers, but also for each one of us, to realize that what we are here to do is to love, and to share that love by teaching and practicing, so that we can step into it to a greater degree. Each of us is a teacher and a learner. We are our own teachers, simultaneously learning. And good teaching consists of many components. I'm going to share some of them with you. One of them is design. So in this teaching, it's the idea for Center for Spiritual Living, it's the teaching of a spiritual layout of life itself, of principles, of ideas that are provable. Another part of good teaching is content. And so for each one of us, the question to ask ourselves to determine if the content of our life and our situation and our relationships is where it should be in alignment with that life itself principle is, does it align with principle, or is it of my personal opinion? Am I deciding to join this group or this movement or that movement based on my personal opinions, or am I deciding to join it or be a part of that idea because it aligns with principles of life that are eternal? Another idea is delivery. Delivery is all about an invitation to surrender for each one of us to our higher power, and to realize our personal empowerment and our responsibility in it. To recognize the difference between when it's our personal opinion and when it is in alignment with principle. Another valuable part of teaching is assessing, and that gets asked by the question of, how is that working for me? How is this working for me? How are things working out? What's demonstrating around me? That's how we assess whether we need to make a shift. So there's, in Science of Mind, when you begin taking classes in Science of Mind, there's quite often the idea that we look for parking places. We look to see if we get the best parking places. So David and I participated in that, and we got a lot of chuckles as we did it, because we noticed that as we would go to a store, David would always get the very first parking space. It wasn't even handicapped, no, but it was always right there available for him to just go right, for us, to just go right in the door. But whenever I was the one driving, we'd go up, down the rows, and I would finally say, oh, fine, I'm not driving around anymore, we're going to park here and walk. And then we'd walk for a long way to get into the store. So one day as we were walking, kind of giggling at how he always could manifest so well, I said, wait a minute. I'm manifesting exactly according to my dominant thought lately. And my dominant thought was, boy, I really need to start exercising. I was getting the parking places way in the back. I was getting exactly what I'd asked for. So if what's showing up around us is not what we thought we were asking for, maybe getting real clear with what we're asking for, and that takes place in that assessment part of good teaching for ourselves, being a good teacher for ourselves.
Apparently she was thinking David needs more exercise too.
The last one in good teaching is the idea of reflecting. And that correlates back to what I just talked about, looking for and reflecting upon what is the dominant pattern in our thought processes, and how is that dominant thought serving us? because realization that it's working means continuation. I never started looking for the closest parking place again because I realized that that exercise was valuable. And I can see now, I just had another thought come through my mind that it sort of was working during those same times. My classroom is one of the farthest away from the office, also in the parking lot at school. So some other high quality teaching strategies. One is that it's learner centered. That means that we are opening up to the universal whole so that we can take into our personal soul the greatest and highest idea and embrace it so that we can play it forward in our experience, because we truly learn best from our own practices. Another one is that we make our teaching and learning for ourselves, within ourselves, activity-based. Get yourself fully involved in whatever it is. Don't just think that I can say it once and then it's a done deal. Get yourself involved. Stay open to what is mine to do. This provides a strong understanding for us of the necessary processes for our own personal growth and development. And notice we're talking all about our own personal growth and development. We can't get our business intertwined with someone else's business. That's their life. It's not our life. They get to live that. We get this one. And it is one, yes. And at the same time, we must take personal responsibility for how we think about those that we love around us. We don't get to determine. I remember one time someone asked me if I would please pray for her son because they were getting a divorce and she just didn't want them to. And I said, I will absolutely pray for your son and his wife. I will pray for the highest and best for them. The highest and best for the ones that we are praying for and with. Not a specific outcome for them. They get to be the learner and the teacher of their own experiences. And the final idea there is the idea of identifying misconceptions. So we know that outcomes are impacted by our personal thought and our experiences. And consistent, persistent learners observe their own personal thought and then watch for signs of inaccurate beliefs. Each one of us has learned inaccurate beliefs along the way, and those are also known as misconceptions. They aren't truths. They aren't the truth of us or of our world, but they're ideas that we misinterpret. And so as we clear those misconceptions from our mind, we are able to think more clearly. It's David and my intention in ministry to be a teacher, not a preacher, to offer up ideas that are of principles, of ways of life that can better us regardless of our differences in opinion. There are some who determine that it is their ministry, like that one talking about the music, that it is their ministry to lead people to the right way, which is the way that they believe. And it has even become more powerfully shared in social ideas and political ideas, etc., etc., etc. However, we believe that if Ernest Holmes were here today, he would continue teaching. He would spread this teaching as a teaching and offer people the opportunity to recognize their personal power through a realization of the self-givingness of life itself. And this belief, realizing our own power and taking the responsibility for it, this belief and action will create a world that works well for everyone.
Yeah, if you've read very much of the Science of Mind text or taken any classes here, you will find that predominantly the teaching that we receive is individually directed learning. It's telling people how to think about life and how to shift their thoughts to create positive outcomes in life. It is said that we have no doctrine in science of mind. And I don't know that that's true necessarily. We use a lot of terminology and so on, but we don't indoctrinate. We do not tell people what they have to think. We do not tell people you have to believe this, you have to believe that. In fact, we actually use spiritual traditions, all religions, and combine them all together to find common truths. And so what we believe is the things that we are teaching are universal truths, not things that we believe that you should have to believe to become a part of our community here. We facilitate learning for the purpose of individual growth and expansion. Back at the time when, during the reintegration of the two separate halves of religious science, when they finally came back together after all those years, there was some conversation about being the change you want to see in the world. Not that one, but making the world a place that works for everyone, and accepting that responsibility on our part to make the change of the world so that the world is a place that works for everyone. There are a lot of people who were old-time religious scientists who said, well, that's not really our job, because this is a personal empowerment, personal learning, personal growth and expansion teaching. And it happens with each of us individually. You're not really worried about what's happening globally or socially. We're more concerned about what's happening within us, knowing that as we change ourselves, we change the world. And so I believe that to some extent. At the same time, I definitely believe that as we change ourselves, we change the world. And so from that perspective, I say yes. And in fact, it was in our mission vision statement. We say just a little bit ago, making it a world that works well for everyone. So as we improve ourselves, we make it a world that works well for everyone. We find out what makes sense to us, what we believe in, and follow that path, because it is an individualized, directed learning. The Buddha agreed. The Buddha said, we do not believe, he says, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe in anything simply because it is found written in your religious books. Do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. I think that is a perfect analysis of what the science of mind teaching is all about. Deciding what works for you and realizing that working with me, since I'm one with all that is, works for everyone else as well. So this teaching is aimed at personal fulfillment and accepting personal responsibility for the conditions we experience and create in this world. Even God has no purpose or agenda above our own personal desires. I like what Parker says, God does not have any idea what's going to happen in your life till you make up your mind. This teaching is focused on personal empowerment through realizing and applying the truth of who and what we are. We are divine beings.
Yes, and so we differ even a little bit on that part. I love the idea of a world that works well for everyone, and I love it because and yet we believe in the individual empowerment and responsibility, and I believe that since we are one, as each one of us, and it falls out onto more and more and more people, this idea of personal empowerment and personal responsibility, that does create a world that works well for everyone. That's how we get there. We are not here to mandate forms of spiritual expression. We learn how to think, as David is saying, not what to think. Ernest Holmes wrote, "Find me one person who is for something and against nothing, who is redeemed enough not to condemn others out of the burden of their own soul, and I will find an exalted human being." Wow, those are powerful words. They are words of personal empowerment and personal responsibility. They mean that we cannot be against others and still expect to live in total and complete bliss. We must be for life itself. We must be for peace and joy and live in that manner. My favorite saying, and I think I'm going to, at this point, I often say, oh, I have so many different sayings, but I do think today, anyway, that my favorite Ernest Holmes saying is, to learn how to think is to learn how to live. To learn how to think rightly is to learn how to live. So isn't it interesting that none of us were taught that skill? I never took a class to learn how to think. I don't remember anyone telling me that if I would just think about love and peace and goodness, then I would make my own life better or my relationships better. I don't remember that, learning that skill of how to think, how to hold on to those thoughts that are magnificent and multiply the good feelings. So the greatest skill that we can teach ourselves, each of us individually, is to teach and practice and teach. Words from Ernest Holmes.
Yeah, I love that what he says about being exalted human beings, or finding exalted human beings. And then gets a little bit of play on words, or maybe it's very specific because he says exalted human beings. We are all spiritual beings, so therefore we are all already exalted beings. We are God in expression, so how can we be anything but exalted? But we are living this human experience, and sometimes we forget that we are divine beings. And so it's important for us to remember that. And when we remember that and actually put it into practice, then we are exalted human beings. Mental treatment enables us to condition our thinking and allows us to open ourselves to greater possibilities. It's recognizing and remembering our divinity, the truth of who we are. Prayer and treatment and learning all work at the level of causation, as I said before. Otherwise, we're just shuffling and rearranging conditions around us, physical conditions. And the truth is that we are more than that. We grow by expanding our horizons, and God's will is an ever-expanding horizon into which we can consciously grow, continuously grow.
So, a few weeks ago, someone asked me, who was Ernest Holmes? And I gave an answer. And the person said, yeah, but who was Ernest Holmes? And I gave another answer, and I heard it 3 times, and I was finally like, oh, maybe I'm not being clear, or I'm not sure what the person wants from me. So we decided that we would talk for the next 3 or 4 weeks about who Ernest Holmes is, meaning related to the different teachers that Ernest Holmes had throughout the years. So we are going to talk about Ernest Holmes and one teacher 1 week, and Ernest Holmes and another teacher, and share how he came to this science of mind philosophy. And he did indeed have many, many teachers, and he took all those ideas and brought them together to formulate his own idea, which is provable and is absolutely teachable. So there are many teachers that share, but the best of teachers, and I'm sure you can think of many names that are the best of teachers, share by example, by the way that they live their life. They don't claim that they are the authority. They do say that your own thought is what heals you and reveals new understanding.
Yeah, so Science of Mind quite often talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. And that means people like Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad and so on, spiritual leaders, but also philosophers of the ages that have proven things that are universal truths. So we are literally standing on the shoulders of giants, but that's not about reliving the past when they were here. It's about using the teachings as a foundation to rise up and see into the realm of infinite possibilities for our own edification. We don't venerate religious icons or make them immortal, and we don't do that for Ernest Holmes either. We honor Ernest as a great teacher, and we appreciate, value, and honor his life's work and the beautiful spiritual philosophy that he created, and we find it very applicable to ourselves, and so therefore we talk about it quite a bit.
There is a great quote that is attributed to Nikola Tesla, which is when you understand every opinion is a vision loaded with personal history, you will start to understand that all judgment is a confession. That's a powerful statement. So the first part, to me, is looking at the idea that it's important to have an opinion, but realize that each and every one of your opinions is based on your own personal history. No, don't expect the world to share your personal opinion. The world didn't share in that personal history. And so opening up and allowing each one to have their own opinion while realizing that principle and universal law and the way it works is true for each one of us and provable for us, for ourselves. The second part, looking at judgment is a confession, is demonstrating our own limited thinking. If I choose to judge someone or something, that is because my thinking is limited. I am not open to the whole. And so that really broadens for us the idea of what God is and how God operates. It probably, hopefully, softens parts of us that tend to be judgmental because we learned that through the years.
So I trust by now you're beginning to see that science of mind philosophy is not a dissemination of mandates or things that we have to do. It is not the only path to enlightenment. It is a teaching, it is a path to remembering our inherent truth, to assist us to personal empowerment and enlightenment.
And it's the one we choose. And let us conclude today with a magnificent quote from Ernest Holmes, extremely meaningful. So take a breath and take this in. We need to know with scientific certainty that there is a consciousness and a power in the universe that responds to us definitely, directly, and dynamically. Each individual must arrive at a place in his own consciousness where this contact is so immediate and so dynamic that if every other living soul denied it, he would still know. And so it is.